What's going on, Go Format Duels? I want to do something a little different today, and that is talking a little bit about GOAT format history. And specifically, I want to talk about three decks from a few years ago that players at the time thought were really good, maybe even too good, right? These were decks that people thought were unbeatable, and they actually turned out to not be very good. And the reason that I want to discuss this is not really to shit on people who thought these decks were good. We all make mistakes, myself included, but more as an educational tool, right? We want to learn from history and understand what works, what doesn't work, why things didn't work, and maybe we can even draw some parallels to decks today. So the first deck that I want to talk about, this is a deck that people just call Detox Goat Control. And Goat Control, of course, is still a top tier deck in Goat format, and Goat Control is a very good deck. However, this build is very outdated. And why is that? Why did this build not work? There was a time when you look at the meta and maybe 70% of the decks in a tournament might look something like this, very similar. So they might change one or two cards. People would debate, oh, do we play one Abyss Soldier, two Abyss Soldier, whatever. But everyone played something very similar to this. And why was this not good? Why did this not work? So the first thing that you'll notice is this deck plays two Airknight Parshath. And Airknight Parshath for a very long time was considered one of the main power cards of GOAT format, and now it is very rarely seen. And the reason why is, of course, Airknight, it's very good against Scapegoat, right? We all know that. The problem is it doesn't really do a whole lot else. So in today's meta, Airknight isn't very good. I think it maybe could be good in the future. It's possible that it could make a comeback if Goats becomes more popular. But that's one of the reasons that this list is outdated. The second thing that I want to call out is actually this Abyss Soldier. And at the time this deck was popular, the Abyss Soldier is one of the main choices that I criticized. The fact that a lot of people were playing two of this card, whereas I thought one or zero is probably more appropriate. And the reason why is because, like Airknight, Abyss Soldier is very good against Goat Control, but not really that great versus a whole lot else. So what you see is we've got four cards that are really good against other Goat Control decks, but kind of bad versus the meta as a whole. And something that maybe seems obvious, but I think a lot of players don't think about, is that a deck can never be good because it beats itself, right? In order for a deck to be good, it has to beat other decks in the meta. So around 2018, 2019, one of the questions that I would always ask Goat Control players is, what does your deck beat? And you would get different answers from people in regards to that. But what most people say is, oh, well, I'm really good at playing the mirror. And that's fine, of course. I mean, that's definitely a great skill to have in Goat format. But winning mirror matches is never enough to really take you to the top, like, in the long term. You gotta know how to beat other decks too. So the third card choice that I want to call it is this two Tsukiyomi. And in Goat Control today, you usually see one of this card. And this is another card that, yes, it's very good versus Goat Control, right? Because it counters Thousand Eyes. You get value with your Merchant and your Magician of Faith. Tsukiyomi, definitely a great card. You definitely see a lot of decks playing one copy, sometimes even two copies. But again, this is another card that people figure out, like, hey, I can just build a deck where Tsukiyomi is bad versus me, Abyss Soldier's bad versus me, Airknight's bad versus me, Book of Moon's bad versus me. And that deck turned out to be Chaos, right? The sort of, it's evolved a little bit, but the Chaos decks that we see today, all of these cards are very much bad versus them. And, the other thing too is Magical Merchant. Now, again, this is a card you do see some Goat Control decks playing one, maybe two copies. But this is another card that it's not necessarily good or bad versus any particular deck, but it is a little underpowered. Like, it does a lot, but the stuff that it does isn't very powerful. Like, okay, it's a light, it's a level 1, we like that. It draws a card, we like that. But all of those things aren't super powerful. Like, it's a great card to sort of increase the consistency of the deck, but what we really saw is that a lot of decks in the meta evolved in such a way that Merchant wasn't really powerful enough anymore. Abyss Soldier wasn't really powerful enough anymore, and etc. So what we kind of ended up with was a very underpowered deck relative to the meta. As time went on, of course. At first, it was very successful. It had won a lot of tournaments. And to some extent, even same thing with like Sakuretsu Armor. We don't really see a lot of Sakuretsu Armors being played anymore because it's one of these cards like, yeah, it's pretty okay versus everything, but it's not, it's not going to wow you, right? You're never going to like win a game with Sakuretsu Armor. You might win a game and use a Sakuretsu Armor, but Sakuretsu Armor won't be the card that wins you the game. So really what we've seen with Goat Control today compared to this list is two things. One, the deck has kind of changed in such a way that it's playing higher impact cards really like Dark Magician of Chaos, cards like Creature Swap. And then the second thing, and I think this is something that, again, it's a subtlety that I think is lost on a lot of players, Goat Control has kind of become an anti-meta deck. For a long time, of course, Goat Control was the meta, but what makes Goat Control good is the fact that there's a lot of different choices that you can play in the main or the side, and you can kind of take your deck list and evolve it over time and adjust it to the meta. So, again, if Scapegoat comes back, we might see Air Knight come back. Right now, if you check out my Goat Control profile, which I will have a link to, you can kind of see the choices that I made and why I thought they were good against the meta. One choice that I think a lot of Goat Control players are using that happens to be good in the current meta is Solemn Judgment, right? Because the idea is that, hey, decks have gotten more powerful. We need something that can shut down these power cards. That's kind of what Solemn Judgment is doing. But let's move on to the next list. This is an interesting one. This is Drain Burn. And for a while, now, you didn't have everyone saying that this deck was broken, but there is definitely sort of a vocal group of people that were like, yeah, this deck is either the best deck or like at least one of the top three. And in fact, a few years ago, if you had said, oh, Drain Burn is one of the top three decks, it wouldn't have been that controversial. Most people probably would have agreed with you. But in fact, this deck is actually like really bad. Like, I don't even think it's tier 2 today. This is like a tier 3 deck. And the reason why is because it's just way too easy to counter. When the deck works, you're like, wow, this is really annoying. And you did have people making that argument that I have sort of made about other decks like Library FTK and Empty Jar, which is, oh, this deck is really broken, but people just don't play it because it's really lame. And yeah, a lot of people said that about this deck because the idea was you just got a skill drain active, and then you had Big Shield for defense. They couldn't even cross out it. Couldn't go to attack mode because of skill drain. And then you just sit on that wall, and you just use a bunch of fake traps and Solemn Judgments to protect that setup. That was basically all the deck did. It was, a combo deck, but it took a while to win. It was sort of what I would call, in the category of slow combo decks, in the sense that, you get the combo out early, which is skill drain, Big Shield, and then at some point you just find a way to kill them, right? Either with Just Desserts or Secret Barrel or really Nightmare Wheel. Nightmare Wheel is actually kind of the big one. You don't play Wave Motion Cannon because it's not protected by Fake Trap, but Nightmare Wheel does a lot of what Wave Motion Cannon does, but you can protect it with Fake Trap. But anyways, why is this deck so easily countered? Well, at the time this deck was played, and this is Shane's winning list from FLC3, he actually, in the finals of that tournament, he beat a Chaos deck. And the interesting thing about that Chaos deck was it was playing Raigeki Break and not Phoenix Windblast. Now, at the time, I, of course, have been advocating for Phoenix Windblast almost as long as I've been playing GOAT format. But, at the time, really no one was playing Phoenix Windblast. And Fake Trap doesn't stop Wing Blast. So, just using Wing Blast on a wall of Revealing Light could be very powerful because it gets rid of it, can't be stopped by Fake Trap, and then if they already paid too many life points, they can't even use their wall of Revealing Light again. You can even Wing Blast, Skill Drain, get some effects off for the turn, and then snowball that into a win. But, the other thing too is that even at the time, players who played this deck knew, they're like, okay, this deck is really good, but there are two things that the deck has a hard time dealing with. Giant Trunade and Royal Decree. And the view back then was, oh, well, no one plays those two cards, so this deck is broken. However, today, of course, we know that people do play those cards, actually. And not even to counter this deck, right? They just play them because they're good cards. Trinid, of course, we see that a lot in decks like Reasoning Gate, Library FTK. Those decks aren't really that popular, but occasionally you will even see like one copy of Giant Trinade in Warriors or Goat Control. It's not necessarily a common choice, but you do see it on occasion. And Royal Decree is just a good card, as it turns out. I mean, I haven't played a lot of Royal Decree myself, but I'll be the first to admit Royal Decree is a very strong card. You can really get a lot of value with Royal Decree. You kind of have to build your deck around it, of course. You can't play a whole lot of chops if you're using it, but there's plenty of people that have been successful with just that strategy. So, with Drainbird before, the view was like, okay, maybe our opponent will side in Royal Decree, but we'll at least get to win game one for free. However, the problem is now is people just main deck Royal Decree. So, it's kind of the opposite. It's like you're going to lose game one, and then you have to try to side against their Royal Decree with something like Double Snare or whatever. And, even Jinzo is a card that, Jinzo's not super popular today, but it's more popular today than it was 4 years ago. And this deck, you can try to get your skill drain into play before they use their Jinzo, but that's not always a guarantee. So yeah, I mean, this deck was a fun idea. It was an interesting deck. It did win tournaments, but yeah, it's too easily countered today. Finally, the third deck that I want to talk about is Noelle Gate, and this deck is a little different from the others in the sense that I actually think this is a pretty good deck. However, we don't really see it today anymore. And I think there's really two main reasons for that. So at the time this deck was built, it was really slept on by a lot of players, really including myself, because like, why do we want to play Thunder Dragon and Reasoning in the same deck? And of course, Noelle, her sort of counter argument was, well, don't be an idiot, right? You can sort of play around that. The idea is you get your Thunder Dragon first, then you activate your Reasoning. If you get your cards the wrong order, you have Reload to fix your hand. So this deck was actually pretty good. And I actually think, again, at the time this built, this was probably the best Reasoning Gate deck at the time it was built. And the reason why is because a lot of the people who used Reasoning Gate at this time tried to make it like a control deck. I mean, to me, that is just the most ridiculous thing in the world that anyone would try to do that. But that was like the popular view at the time. The idea was that, control decks are the best. So if we're playing Reasoning Gate, we shouldn't be trying to OTK. We should be trying to like get value with Air Knight and that sort of thing. And that strategy was just really not good. Like that isn't what Reasoning Gate does effectively. I mean, yes, you can win games by just getting value with Air Knight or getting value with a Blowback Dragon and so on, but that's not what the deck is good at. You're not playing to your deck's strengths. And Noelle really did play to this deck's strengths. She was just like, look, I'm just going to kill people on, turn 2, turn 3, very consistently. Got lots of deck thinning with Toon Table, with Thunder Dragon. So yeah, this deck was actually really good, believe it or not. However, the good thing is that I think since this time, players have come up with Reasoning Gate decks that are even better than this, right? We do see that all of the Reasoning Gate decks today, they are combo decks. They're not trying to draw cards with Air Knight or something like that. That is something that I have talked about in previous videos where I said, hey, playing multiple Air Knights in your Reasoning Gate deck, probably a mistake. So yeah, Reasoning Gate has been pretty successful, but what people realize is there's stuff that you can do that's even more broken than this. So again, some choices like Reckless Greed, I think, very ahead of her time. That is something that we see in Reasoning Gate more frequently now, because the idea is, hey, I'm going to wait until my combo turn. Maybe it's turn 3, maybe it's turn 4. I'm going to activate Reckless Greed, and I'm just going to win the game. But, what we've seen is that, this deck can OTK pretty effectively, but if you play like Cyberstein, you get a lot of the strength that this deck has, but you get to play Cyberstein, right? And the other thing, too, is that Noelle didn't play Scapegoat. I think largely just due to the fact that at the time this deck was made, Scapegoat as a card was very popular, so a lot of people were playing counters to that. So a lot of people were playing Air Knight, a lot of people were playing Azura Priest, a lot of people were playing King Tiger, And the idea was like, hey, I could just build Reasoning Gate without playing Scapegoat. But that's not really a problem today. So I think like if you were to play a deck like this, I would try to fit in a couple of Scapegoats. Doesn't even have to be 3, but today I think Scapegoat is one of the key pieces of Reasoning Gate. It is sort of one of the cards that you need to play, and the reason why is because it is both a combo enabler and a stall card. And cards that can give you time to draw your combo while also being part of your combo are very powerful in card games as a whole. That goes like even beyond GOAT format. So again, you know, what we saw was that Reasoning Gate deck sort of evolved past this. But, you know, at the time that, you know, Noelle had like a few tournaments that she just kind of crushed with this deck. And, you know, a lot of people did have the feeling that, yeah, this is like one of the best combo decks in the format. And again, I think it's a pretty good deck, in many ways was ahead of its time. But yeah, this deck didn't really turn out to be broken. Also keep in mind too that Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer is a lot more popular today, and this deck has a very difficult time dealing with Kaiku. You know, you would put some cards in the side deck for it, but again, you know, in a normal Reasoning Gate deck, one of your outs to Kaiku would be Goat's meta, right? Pretty simple. And this deck doesn't have that, so you can't counter it that way. Some Reasoning Gate decks play Snatch Steal. This list does it. There are reasons for that. But yeah, so this deck doesn't really have any ways to deal with Kaiku, and it's just a little outdated. So yeah, those are the 3 decks that players used to think were broken, but today aren't. And let me know if you think there are any parallels to today. Do you think there are any decks in GOAT format today that a lot of players say are just super good that you think in a few years no one's going to be playing? I'm sure there will be some, but, you know, I can't predict the future, so I don't know what they are, but we'll see. And yeah, if you liked this video, then watch this video here.